And we left off last week on the bottom of page 127. I believe we're on the last paragraph on 127. And last week it got pretty intense, pretty deep discussions that we got in here. I mean, this chapter is called The Family Afterwards, right? And there was a lot of discussion about how this stuff starts unfolding as the alcoholic is going through the recovery process and just recovering, and the changes they're going through and the changes the family's going through, and trying to put this together to make some kind of cohesion. And there's a lot of painful stuff that comes up that we're going to be dealing with, that we're going to have to be going through. And a lot of that was expressed last week. For instance, on page 26, 126, it talks about, I think just before this, they say that an alcoholic generally takes one of two directions. He may either, in their experience, and who is their experience? It's the authors. Remember, we read in the beginning, if you guys didn't catch this wasn't authored by one person. This is authored by more than 100 men and women. This is based on their experience. And their experience says one of two ways the new guy goes, the guy or gal. So they plunge into a frantic attempt to get on their feet in business, start getting their finances back together. Or number two, they get so enthralled with this new way of living that they talk or think of almost nothing else other than this spiritual way of living. One of two ways. They're extremes that we get into. That's their experience. And it goes into talking about that on 126, it says he may take small interest in the children and may show irritation when reproved for his delinquencies, because either way, whether you're headlong into your business or headlong into this whole thing about a spiritual experience, they're feeling neglected again, just the same way they felt when we were drinking, right? And now you're not paying attention to children. If not irritable, he may seem dull and boring, not gain affections the family would like him to be. But then they go into, mother may complain about the inattention. They're all disappointed and often let him feel it. But beginning with such complaints, a barrier arises. And I would certainly think about underlining that. A barrier arises, because that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to bring the family back together. And this is the barrier. And it starts on what? Resentment. This is what's starting to brew here. That's what they're talking about. At the bottom of the page, it says, but dad doesn't give freely of himself, resentments grow. He becomes still less communicative. Sometimes he explodes over a trifle, and the family's mystified, and they criticize, pointing out how he's falling down on a spiritual program. This sort of thing can be avoided based on their experience. Both, underline, both father and family are mistaken, though each side may have some justification. But underline this, because this is the common ground. It is of little use to argue, and only makes the impasse worse. I think both sides can agree to that. You're arguing, the impasse is only going to get worse. The family must realize that dad, though marvelously improved, is still convalescing. I like the way they use that word. You're still learning this new way of life. You've just begun. You may have had a spiritual experience by now, but that doesn't mean that you're settled in. And remember, it said it's going to take years to rebuild the structures that we pulled down. It's going to take years to rebuild our lives. So he's still convalescing. He's still learning about this deal. They should be thankfully sober and able to be of this world once more. Let them praise his progress. Let them remember that his drinking wrought all kinds of damage that may take a long time to repair. And if they sense these things, they will not take so seriously his periods of crankiness, depression, or apathy, which, and I would underline this, will disappear. These periods will disappear when there's tolerance, love, and spiritual understanding. That's what's going to make these disappear. Go down to the next paragraph. It says that as far as the head of the house, he ought to remember that he's mainly to blame for what befell his home, right? He can scarcely square the account in his lifetime, but he must see the danger in over-concentration on financial success. Although financial recovery is on the way for many of us, we found we could not place money first for us. I think I said this last week. Highlight and underline this. Material well-being always followed spiritual progress. It never precedes it. It never precedes it. We'll get nowhere in any direction. So, since the home has suffered more than anything else, it is well that a man exert himself there, right? He's not likely to get far in any direction if he fails to show unselfishness and love under his own roof. And I go back to, I think we covered this last week, but if you look at page 82, we'll kind of expand on that a little bit. The last paragraph down there, where it says, about halfway down that last paragraph, it's selfish and inconsiderate habits. That is what has kept the home in turmoil. Selfish and inconsiderate. It's not drinking that has had our, can't tell you how many times we've heard that in AA. If any of you have been like, well, it was my drinking that's just, no, it's not. It's selfish and inconsiderate habits. That is what keeps our home in turmoil. And you know what? If you're just sober and you're not recovered, there's a very, very good likelihood that you're still suffering from untreated addiction. Your home is still going to be in turmoil. The only difference is you don't get a little bit of relief from picking up a drink. So it'll even be in more turmoil. That's the problem. So we need to exert ourselves there. And I also point out on page 18, they reinforce this very early on in the book on page 18, in the first paragraph, 3 lines down, goes back to where we say, we feel elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. I mean, we focus on that a lot. Sober, that's elimination of drinking. That is just a beginning in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is not the end all here. You can be sober for many, many years and still be very, very sick, and your house can still be in very much turmoil. I'm a good example of that. I understand that because I lived that way for a long time. And then it says a much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and our affairs. I believe in when we're getting into step 9, they said that our family is going to be much more interested, and I have to paraphrase because I don't remember the exact words, but they're going to be much more interested in what we're doing than what we're saying. And they say that just a mumbling of we're sorry is not going to be enough, right? They've heard that. They've heard that many times. It's going to be what we're doing, the demonstration of our principles, which they also talk about on page 99 in the first paragraph. And this is in working with others. It says, after they have seen, talking about the family, tangible results, that would be the demonstration of your principles, then the family perhaps may want to go along. These things will come to pass naturally and in good time, provided, however, the alcoholic continues to demonstrate that he can be sober, considerate, and helpful, regardless of what anyone says or does. And the only way that we can do that, to be considerate, loving, and helpful, regardless of what anyone in the family says or does, is through a spiritual experience of relying on God, because God knows that I can't do that. I can't do that. I don't have the power to do that. My character defects will just claw right up there and just attack everybody and anybody in our path. I mean, that's been our whole problem. So that's what they're talking about here in 127. So I'll go back to 127, the last paragraph. That's where we left off last week. It says, as each member of a resentful family begins to see his shortcomings and admits them to the others, he lays a basis for helpful discussion. So this is how we're going to start changing the basis. Remember we read about the basis in the doctor's opinion? You guys remember the definition of a basis? Basis is a fixed pattern of doing things. Fixed means not subject to change or fluctuation. Well, this is going to be the basis for our helpful discussion, how we're going to work with each other. And it's going to be not pointing at you, but pointing at me. And what that just simply means is take responsibility for my part. It's the same thing we've learned from steps 4 through 9. Regardless of what they did, take responsibility for my part. And it completely, you'll find you do that, you have taken away any ability that somebody on the other side would have to attack, because you just made yourself vulnerable and defenseless, right? There's nothing to attack. I've already told you what I've done. There's no reason for you to tell me again, right? I'm admitting it. My fault. That's how we begin this new way of living. And it is a new way of living. It is a new way of living for all of us. Certainly is. These family talks will be constructive if they can be carried on without heated argument, without self-pity, without justification, and without resentful criticism. That's the things we want to avoid. Might be a good idea to write that down, especially for a newcomer. Little by little, mother and children will see they ask too much, and father will see he gives too little. But underlying giving rather than getting will become the guiding principle. Isn't that something? How simple is that? Giving rather than getting. As much as I want is how much I should give. Just give and see what can come back. That's demonstrating our principles. That's what this is about. Assume, on the other hand, that father has at the outset a stirring spiritual experience. Overnight, as it were, he's a different man. He becomes a religious enthusiast. He's unable to focus on anything else. As soon as the sobriety begins to be taken as a matter of course, the family may look at their strange new dad with apprehension and then with irritation. There's talk about spiritual matters, morning, noon, and night. He may demand that the family find God in a hurry or exhibit amazing indifference to them and say he is above worldly considerations. Anybody ever experience that? Anybody willing to admit that they've experienced that? Huh? They call it spiritual intoxication, that we get involved with. He may tell mother, who's been religious all her life, that she doesn't know what it's all about and that she'd better get his brand of spirituality while there is yet time. When father takes this tack, the family may react unfavorably, do you think? They may be jealous of a God who has stolen dad's affection. While grateful that he drinks no more, would underline they may not like the idea that God has accomplished the miracle where they failed. And then I would also underline they often forget father was beyond human aid. Right? If there's anything, I think one of the most important things in my mind when I'm working with a new person and you're working with the person closest to them, it is that point there, is to make sure that they understand this person is beyond human aid. Your love could not have saved him. And then you can go into the alcoholic illness to explain exactly why they're beyond human aid. But we are beyond human aid. Without knowing that, they're going to be, they're talking about this jealousy that they have. They may not see why their love and devotion did not straighten them out. Dad is not so spiritual after all, they say. If he means to right his past wrongs, why all this concern for everyone in the world but his family? My God, I heard that a lot. I think I've mentioned to you guys that my wife is not part of this. And in the beginning, this was not an easy convalescing period for the two of us to figure out how we're going to mesh. And she still isn't part of this. We have a good working relationship today, but I believe that it may have been a lot easier, as the book says, had she been a part of this. But this really hit home, is why all this concern for all these other people that you don't even know, yet not enough concern at home. And in some instances, that's true, because my defense is, well, look here on page 89, it says that nothing is going to ensure immunity from drinking is constantly working with other people. But there's also a whole lot in here we're reading about that we're going to need to find a balance. And we just got done reading that the one place that we have hurt the most is our home. The one place that we need to exert our principles the most is at home. We cannot ignore that. While it is of utmost importance, vital to work with other people, it's also vital to demonstrate at home our principles. 100%. It can be a difficult thing to get through. So where are we at here? With all this concern for everybody else, what about his talk that God will take care of them? Yeah, God will take care of you. They suspect father is a bit balmy. He's not so unbalanced as they might think. Many of us have experienced dad's elation. We have indulged in this spiritual intoxication. Like a gaunt prospector, belt drawn over the last ounce of food, or pick struck gold. What they're talking about is this is what happens when you have the spiritual experience. I mean, we read in the promises how wonderful life is, how wonderful we feel. And it's like our pick struck gold, man. We feel good for the first time without being drunk, right? We actually are sober and we feel really, really good. And it's like, man, I struck gold. And what does it say? It says, joy at our release from a lifetime of frustration knew no bounds. Father feels like he has struck something better than gold. For a time, he may try to hug the new treasure to himself. He may not see at once, and I would underline this, that he's barely scratched a limit load which will pay dividends only if he mines it for the rest of his life and insists on giving away the entire product. It's not just a little bit of gold you found. This is an unlimited amount. As long as you keep mining for it, keep doing the work, keep close to God, perform his work well, and continue giving it away to other people, it will continue to pay dividends. Okay, we don't need to just 100% pull it all in because I love this and spend 95% of my time working with other people, going to meetings, talking day, noon, and night about spiritual experiences. I think it tells us at some point, and we might be reading it here soon, that God wants us to keep our feet on the ground here. Our heads may be, but our feet need to be on the ground. This is where we perform his work. If the family cooperates, Dad will soon see that he is suffering from a distortion of values. He will perceive that his spiritual growth is lopsided, that for an average man like himself, a spiritual life which does not include his family obligations may not be so perfect after all. Highlight and underline that. Right? A spiritual life which does not include your family obligations may not be so perfect after all. And notice what they also said in here. Dad will realize that if the family cooperates. Understand, and what do they mean by cooperating? Back to what they talked about earlier. Understand that this guy's still sick and he's convalescing. He's still going through this period of growth, and it's going to take time. Now, you can fight it all you want, but we've already come to the one common agreement that the more we argue, it's just going to create a barrier and an impasse, right? We're not going to get anywhere with that. If the family will appreciate that Dad's current behavior is but a phase of his development, all will be well. In the midst of an understanding and sympathetic family, these vagaries of Dad's spiritual infancy will quickly disappear. And I can attest that's what happened to me. The opposite may happen should the family condemn and criticize. Dad may feel that for years his drinking has placed him on the wrong side of every argument, but that now he has become a superior person with God on his side. If the family persists in criticism, this fallacy may take a still greater hold on Father. Instead of treating the family as he should, he may retreat further into himself and feel he has spiritual justification for doing so. Though the family does not fully agree with Dad's spiritual activities, they should let him have his head. Let him do what he needs to do. Even if he displays a certain amount of neglect and irresponsibility towards the family, it is well to let him go as far as he likes in helping other alcoholics. During those first days of convalescence, this will do more to ensure sobriety than anything else. It's probably a good thing to point out as well. And for them to understand this is just a phase. It will level out. There's no way you can continue growing your spiritual experience while neglecting your family and not knowing it. It just doesn't happen. We will come to our senses and know it for certain. Though some of his manifestations are alarming and disagreeable, we think Dad will be on a firmer foundation than the man who is placing business or professional success ahead of spiritual development. He'll be less likely to drink again, and anything is preferable to that. Those of us who have spent much time in the world of spiritual make-believe have eventually seen the childishness in it. This dream world has been replaced by a great sense of purpose, accompanied by a growing consciousness of the power of God in our lives. It's kind of like, you guys remember in the beginning, or even, I believe I counted, there's like 10 people that are less than 6 months here. You start going to a lot of meetings, and when you walk out of a meeting, you just feel on top of the world and everything's great. And it's about, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes after you get out of the parking lot, then the real world sets in, and then that feeling just goes away, right? It's finding that balance between the two. It's finding the balance. That's what living this way of life is. In the beginning, we find this spiritual experience and we're very sensitive to it because we spent our whole lives without it. We spent our whole lives restless, irritable, and discontent, as the doctor's opinion says. No relief other than drinking, which ended up bringing on more problems. So for the first time, we start feeling good. But then when we get back into the real world, it's fleeting. Bill even talks about it when he first had a spiritual experience. So there is a time that is convalescing, and it's different for every one of us how long that is. But if we keep going, we keep growing. So it says that the alcoholic's only hope, the only hope we have, the only hope is the maintenance and growth of our spiritual experience. And if we keep growing, these things will come to pass because God will show us what we need to be doing if we're dependent upon it. It's just going to come to pass. The this dream world has been replaced by a great sense of purpose, accompanied by the growing consciousness of the power of God in our lives. We've come to believe He would like us to keep our heads in the clouds with Him. There it is. But that our feet ought to be firmly planted on earth. That is where our fellow travelers are, and that is where our work must be done. Okay. What does it mean by our work? Well, if you remember, they said around step 9 that our new purpose, it says, well, we're trying to get our lives together right now. Our real purpose now is to fit ourselves to be of maximum, exactly, maximum purpose to God and our fellow man. That's our whole new, that's our job now. And that's where our work is to be done, is what they're saying, is here. These are the realities for us. We found nothing incompatible between a powerful spiritual experience and a life of sane and happy usefulness. One more suggestion. Whether the family has spiritual convictions or not, they may do well to examine the principles by which the alcoholic member is trying to live. There's a second time, I think we've read that just in the last, I think in this chapter. And we've read it in 2 Wives several times, where we offer our way of living to them. This is what they're talking about here. They may do well to examine those principles. They can hardly fail to approve these simple principles, though the head of the house still fails somewhat in practicing them. This is a great one to underline. Nothing will help the man who is off on a spiritual tangent so much as a wife who adopts the same spiritual program in making better practical use of it. Right? 100%. Somebody's got some experience with that in here, I think. There will be other profound changes in the household. Liquor incapacitated father for so many years that mother became head of the house. She met these responsibilities gallantly. By force of circumstances, she was often obliged to treat father as a sick or wayward child. Even when he wanted to assert himself, he could not, for his drinking placed him constantly in the wrong. Mother made all the plans and gave the directions, and when sober, father usually obeyed. He obeyed. Thus, mother, through no fault of her own, became accustomed to wearing the family trousers. Father, coming suddenly to life again, often begins to assert himself, and this means trouble. Unless the family watches for these tendencies in each other and comes to a friendly agreement about them. Remember, there's change happening here, man. There's change happening, and we have to watch for it. And how is this going to convalesce? That's what they're talking about. Drinking isolates most homes from the outside world. Father may have laid aside for years all normal activities, clubs, civic duties, sports, and when he renews interest in these things, a feeling of jealousy may arise. Haven't we heard jealousy over and over? Jealousy of God, jealousy, right? The family may feel they hold a mortgage on dad so big that no equity should be left for outsiders. I would underline this because this is something I went through with my spouse. Instead of developing new channels of activity for themselves, mother and children demand that he stay home and make up the deficiency. At the very beginning, the couple ought to frankly face the fact that each will have to yield here and there if the family is going to play an effective part in the new life. Father will necessarily spend much time with other alcoholics. Might as well get to understand that now. But this activity should be balanced, highlight and underline. New acquaintances who know nothing of alcoholism might be made in thoughtful consideration given their needs. Also, we might need to be useful for even other people who are not alcoholics. Usefulness to everybody. The problems of the community might engage attention. Though the family has no religious connections, they may wish to make contact with or take membership in a religious body. Alcoholics who have derided religious people will be helped by such contacts because being possessed of a spiritual experience, the alcoholic will find he has much in common with these people, though he may differ with them on many matters. If he does not argue about religion, this is going back to page 48, about the obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice, right, about spiritual matters. If we don't argue with him, he will make new friends and is sure to find new avenues of usefulness and pleasure, because he and his family can be a bright spot in such congregations. He may bring new hope and new courage to many a priest, minister, or rabbi who gives all to minister to our troubled world. We have some unique experiences, right? That not only do we pass on to the newcomer, but we can pass on to other families as well, is what they're saying here. Very unique. That maybe a pastor, remember, the addict is beyond human aid. We can show them a way that worked for us to get there. We intend the foregoing as a helpful suggestion only. So this is not part of clear-cut directions. This is just a suggestion, they're saying. So far as we are concerned, there's nothing obligatory about it. As non-denominational people, we cannot make up others' minds for them. Each individual should consult his own conscience. We've been speaking to you of serious and sometimes tragic things. We've been dealing with alcohol in its worst aspect, but we aren't a glum lot. It's another thing to underline. If newcomers could see no joy or fun in our existence, they wouldn't want it. Anybody ever walk into a meeting and just see what you might want to call a glum lot? You know, I was over 40 years, just a glum. And you think, my God, I bet you this guy would feel a whole lot better if he just had a couple drinks on. I've been to meetings like it. What do they say? If you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, we'll show you what we did. Well, that starts with, if you want what we have, you got to show them what you have. What do we read an AA meeting was on the bottom of page 159? Little gathering of men and women who are happy in their release. When they walk into the room, do they see a bunch of people that are happy and thinking about them as newcomers? Just thinking about them, constantly thinking about them, and how we can present to them our discovery of how we got well. That's what we're supposed to be doing here. They need to see we're happy. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. We try not to indulge in cynicism over the state of the nations, nor do we carry the world's troubles on our shoulders. Some of us, including me, may need to underline and highlight that as well. We can certainly get sunk into that. When we see a man sinking into the mire that is alcoholism, we give him first aid and place what we have at his disposal. That sums up a lot. We see somebody who is sick and suffering. What do? We give him first aid and place what we have at his disposal. Earlier in the book, they said we place the spiritual kit of tools at his feet. That's all we can do. It's up to him to pick it up. Back to, if he wants what we have and he's willing to go to any lengths to get it, he'll pick it up and do the work. But that's all we can do. That's all that we have to offer. For his sake, we do recount and almost relive the horrors of our past. But those of us who have tried to shoulder the entire burden and trouble of others find we are soon overcome by them. I think we found in chapter 7, I think they expand on that. They're getting into, we're taking on the entire burden and trouble of others. You're starting to get them to rely on you again, right? And that's something we do not want to do when we're working with other people. They are beyond human aid. All we're doing is showing them how we got out, and that is through finding a relationship with God by doing the clear-cut directions here. That's all we show them. It's not call me every day so I can make sure what you're doing, and then really your sobriety is dependent on me, is what you're really telling them. You don't call me every day, you might not stay sober. Who's that person dependent on? So we don't carry the burden of all their troubles. Do we, if we have experience, we were told that we can tell them how we got out from under certain problems? Yes. But who has the final say? God. Their dependence is on God. That's what they're talking about. So we think cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. Outsiders are sometimes shocked when we burst into merriment over a seemingly tragic experience out of the past. But why shouldn't we laugh? But underline, we have recovered and we have been given the power to help others. That's why we can laugh. We have recovered and we have a solution. Everybody knows that those in bad health and those who seldom play do not laugh much. So let each family play together or separately as much as their circumstances warrant. We are sure that God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. We cannot subscribe to the belief that this life is a vale of tears, though it once was just that for many of us. But it is clear, would underline, that we made our own misery. God didn't do it. Avoid then, I remember early on, I went back to this sentence many times, avoid the deliberate manufacture of misery. And boy, can we do that. We know how to manufacture misery, don't we? Right? Just a couple of words coming out of that mouth, and it just lights the world on fire. Avoid it. But it says, if troubles do come, cheerfully capitalize it as an opportunity to demonstrate, again, his omnipotence. In other words, If I do light the world on fire, it's a great time to go right to step 10 right away. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was wrong. God, remove this from me and move on, right? It's a very simple, quick thing to do. But what do they say? There's a price to be paid in doing this, and it's the destruction of self, and it is painful. It is painful at times. So now about health. A body badly burned by alcohol does not often recover overnight, nor do twisted thinking and depression vanish in a twinkling. We saw that in Bill when he had a spiritual experience, and it said that he was he was depressed, had waves of depression that came over him like right afterwards. So that doesn't go away overnight. We're convinced that a spiritual mode of living is a most powerful health restorative. Spiritual mode of living. Step 10, 11, and 12. We who have recovered from serious drinking are miracles of mental health. But we have seen remarkable transformations in our bodies. Hardly one of our crowd now shows any mark of dissipation. But this does not mean that we disregard human health measures. God has abundantly supplied this world with fine doctors, psychologists, practitioners of various kinds. Do not hesitate to take your health problems to such persons. If you're working with a new person, keep this in mind too. Because I've been guilty of this because I've heard it before too. Well, you're depressed because you're not doing, you need to be working. You know what? Depression is a real thing. You might want to go see a doctor, right? We're not the end all here, right? There could be a serious condition. That's what they're telling us here. Most of them give freely of themselves. That might have been more back then than now. That their fellows may enjoy sound minds and bodies. Try to remember that though God has wrought miracles among us, we should never belittle a good doctor or psychiatrist. Their services are often indispensable in treating a newcomer and in following their case afterwards. One of the many doctors who had the opportunity of reading this book in manuscript form told us that the use of sweets was often helpful, of course, depending on the doctor's advice. Anybody ever go to meetings and see they have little things like candy at the table? We used to have that in Michigan. At every table, they'd have candy. That's where this came from. He thought all alcoholics should constantly have chocolate available for its quick energy value at times of fatigue. He added that occasionally in the night, a vague craving arose which would be satisfied by candy. Many of us have noticed a tendency to eat sweets and have found this practice beneficial. Now, a word about sex relations. Boy, they're covering everything, aren't they? Alcohol is so sexually stimulating to some men that they have overindulged. Couples are occasionally dismayed to find that when drinking is stopped, the man tends to be impotent. Unless the reason is understood, there may be an emotional upset. Some of us have had this experience only to enjoy in a few months a finer intimacy than ever. There should be no hesitancy in consulting a doctor or psychologist if the condition persists. We do not know of many cases where their difficulty lasted long. The alcoholic may find it hard to reestablish friendly relationships with his children. Now, this is some seriousness here. Their young minds were impressionable while he was drinking. Without saying so, they may cordially hate him for what he has done to them and their mother. We talked a bit about this last week. The children are sometimes dominated by a pathetic hardness and cynicism. They cannot seem to forget or forgive and forget. And this may hang on for months, long after their mother has accepted dad's way of living and thinking. And I will tell you, in my experience, it had hung on for years. But a lot of that had to do with me not practicing these principles as well. But I can also tell you, as I said last week, the relationship that I had with my youngest daughter, I didn't think would ever be repaired. Just, she was hard and wanted nothing to do with me. Somehow or another, over time, she came around. And I thank God for it. Thank God for it. This works. In time, they will see that he is a new man, and in their own way, they will let him know it. Amen. When this happens, they can be invited to join in morning meditation, and they can take part in the daily discussion without rancor or bias. From that point on, progress will be rapid. Marvelous results often follow such reunions. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Whether the family goes on a spiritual basis or not, the alcoholic member has to if he would recover. So, back to, we read in the beginning, our way of living has its advantages for all. Whether they go on it or not, it's optional for them. But for us, he has to if he would recover. That means it's vital for us. We have to. The others must be convinced of his new status beyond a shadow of a doubt. That can be a hard one. With my wife, it was. Like, this is what's going to save you. Wasn't convinced of it for a long time. Still don't even know she's 100% there. You know, part of her, I think, would even say, well, you've gotten better just because you're older now. Okay. Enough years. Okay. But whatever. But they need to understand. So how do they get convinced of that? The first thing we do, again, we talked about it. You're working with a new guy, talk to the person closest to him and explain what we're doing and explain how this deal works. That's how we do it. Seeing is believing to most families who have lived with a drinker. Here is a case in point. Love this. This is another case study. One of our friends is a heavy smoker and coffee drinker. There was no doubt he overindulged. Seeing this and meaning to be helpful, his wife commenced to admonish him about it. He admitted he was overdoing these things, but frankly said he was not ready to stop. His wife is one of those persons who really feels there's something rather sinful about these commodities, so she nagged, and her intolerance finally threw him into a fit of anger. He got drunk, resentment. Of course, our friend was wrong. He was dead wrong. He had to painfully admit that and amend his spiritual fences. Though he is now a most effective member of Alcoholics Anonymous, he still smokes and drinks coffee, but neither his wife nor anyone else stands in judgment. Okay? She sees she was wrong to make a burning issue out of such a matter when his more serious ailments were being rapidly cured. We have three little mottos which are apropos. Here they are. First things first, live and let live, and easy does it. And with